Hello everyone. Welcome back to our channel. Today, I'd like you to think about something. A simple idea. An idea many people avoid. An idea many people fear. The idea of starting again. Maybe you've experienced this before. Most people have. You begin something with excitement. A new habit. A new goal. A new project. A new language. For a while, everything feels possible. You feel motivated. You feel focused. You feel hopeful. Then life happens. You become busy. You become tired. Something unexpected appears. A challenge, a setback, a distraction. And slowly the momentum disappears. One day becomes two. 2 days become a week. A week becomes a month. And suddenly something feels different. The goal is still there. But now there is distance between you and the goal. Perhaps you've felt this while learning English. Most people have. You study every day. You listen to podcasts. You learn new words. You practice consistently. Then something interrupts the routine. A busy season. A stressful period. A change in life. And before you realize it, weeks have passed. Maybe even months. Then a thought appears. A familiar thought. Perhaps you've heard it before. I ruined my progress. I should have continued. I've fallen too far behind. It might be too late now. It is a very human tendency. We all struggle with this from time to time. Imagine a traveler walking along a long road. The traveler moves steadily forward, step after step, day after day. The destination is still far away, but progress is being made. Then one day the traveler stops. Perhaps the weather changes. Perhaps the traveler becomes tired. Perhaps something unexpected happens. The traveler rests for a while. Days pass. Then weeks pass. Eventually, the traveler looks down the road and feels discouraged. The destination now feels distant again. But something important is still true. The road has not disappeared. The destination has not disappeared. The journey has not disappeared. Only the movement stopped. And movement can begin again. Perhaps life is more forgiving than we think. Perhaps progress is more patient than we think. Maybe you've noticed something similar in nature. Imagine a tree during winter. The branches are bare. The leaves are gone. Everything looks still. Everything looks empty. From a distance, the tree appears lifeless. And yet something is happening. Beneath the surface, life remains. The roots continue holding the earth. The tree continues waiting. The season has changed. The life has not disappeared. Then spring arrives. Slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. New leaves begin to appear. New growth begins to appear. The tree starts again. Not because it failed, because that is what living things do. They begin again. Imagine the sunrise. Every evening, darkness arrives. The sky becomes quiet. The light disappears. If someone had never seen a sunrise before, they might believe the light was gone forever. But morning returns. Again, and again, and again. The sun rises without embarrassment, without apology, without regret. It simply begins again. Perhaps there is wisdom in that. Perhaps there is something life is trying to teach us. Many people believe that success belongs to those who never stop. But perhaps success belongs to those who keep returning. Those who begin again, again, and again, and again. Think about learning to ride a bicycle. Nobody expects perfection on the first day. You wobble. You fall. You try again. Then you fall again, and again, and again. No one calls this failure. They call it learning. And yet, something strange happens when we become adults. We begin expecting ourselves to move through life without interruption, without mistakes, without pauses, without setbacks. And when those setbacks arrive, we become harsh with ourselves, much harsher than we would ever be with a child. Imagine a friend coming to you and saying, "I stopped learning English for 6 months." Would you tell them it was hopeless? Probably not. Would you tell them they should never try again? Probably not. You would likely say something very simple. Just start again. Sometimes the advice we give others is the advice we most need ourselves. Maybe you've experienced this before. Most people have. There was a book you stopped reading, a habit you stopped practicing, a goal you stopped pursuing, a dream you placed on a shelf, not because you stopped caring, because life became complicated. Life often does. There's nothing unusual about that. It is a very human experience. Imagine standing beside the ocean. A wave reaches the shore, then another, then another. The waves never seem embarrassed to return. They simply come back, again, and again, and again. Perhaps growth works the same way. Perhaps confidence works the same way. Perhaps language learning works the same way. The important thing is not that you never stop. The important thing is that you return. But why do so many people find it difficult to begin again? Why does starting over sometimes feel harder than starting for the first time? And perhaps that is where our story begins to go deeper. Perhaps the answer is simpler than we think. Many people are not afraid of starting again. They are afraid of what starting again seems to mean. Maybe you've experienced this before. Most people have. You stop working toward a goal for a while. Then one day you decide to return. But instead of feeling excited, you feel disappointed. Why? Because the moment you return, you immediately look backward. You think about lost time, lost progress, lost opportunities. You begin comparing where you are now with where you hoped to be. And suddenly, starting again feels heavy. Very heavy. Imagine a traveler walking up a mountain. The traveler climbs for hours, perhaps for days. Then something happens. The traveler stops. When the traveler finally returns, the first thing they notice is not how far they have come. The first thing they notice is how far they still have to go. Perhaps this is why returning feels difficult. We focus on the distance ahead instead of the progress behind. It is a very human tendency. We all struggle with this from time to time. Imagine opening a book you haven't touched in months. The bookmark sits exactly where you left it. At first, you feel regret. I should have finished this. I should have continued. I should be much further by now. But then something interesting happens. You begin reading again. One page, then another, and slowly the story returns. The joy returns. The curiosity returns. The movement returns. The book never judged you for stopping. The book simply waited. Perhaps many things in life are like that. English waits. Books wait. Dreams wait. Goals wait. Sometimes they wait much more patiently than we do. Imagine a musician who hasn't touched a piano for a year. The first notes feel awkward. The fingers feel slow. The confidence feels smaller. Many people stop right there, not because they cannot continue, because they expected the first moment back to feel comfortable. But comfort rarely arrives at the beginning. Comfort arrives after returning, again, and again, and again. Life often rewards those who stay long enough to become comfortable again. Maybe you've noticed this in language learning. The first conversation after a long break feels difficult. Words disappear. Grammar feels distant. Confidence feels weaker. And immediately another thought appears. Maybe I've forgotten everything. But have you? Often the answer is no. The knowledge is still there. The experience is still there. The foundation is still there. It simply needs waking up. Imagine a garden in early spring. For months, the garden appears empty. The flowers seem gone. The colors seem gone. The life seems gone. And yet beneath the soil, the roots remain. Waiting, patiently, quietly. Then one day, small signs begin to appear. A leaf, a stem, a flower. Life returns. Not because it started from nothing, because something was already there. Perhaps growth works the same way. Perhaps we are much closer to starting again than we think. Another reason starting again feels difficult is perfection. Perfection has stopped many journeys. Maybe you've experienced this before. Most people have. You tell yourself, when I have more time, I'll start. When I feel ready, I'll start. When the conditions are perfect, I'll start. And somehow, the perfect moment never arrives. The calendar changes. The seasons change. The years change. But the perfect moment remains somewhere in the future. Imagine standing beside a river you want to cross. But instead of stepping forward, you wait for the water to become completely still. You wait and wait and wait. The problem is that rivers rarely become completely still. Life rarely becomes completely still. There will always be responsibilities. There will always be distractions. There will always be uncertainty. Perhaps courage is not waiting for perfect conditions. Perhaps courage is moving despite imperfect conditions. Imagine a painter looking at a blank canvas. The painter wants the first brushstroke to be perfect. So the painter waits and waits and waits. Meanwhile, another painter begins. The first line is imperfect. The second line is imperfect. The third line is imperfect. But eventually, a painting appears. Not because the painter avoided mistakes, because the painter accepted them. Perhaps starting again requires the same attitude. Not perfection. Participation. Not certainty. Movement. Not guarantees. Action. Life seems to love small beginnings. A tree begins as a seed. A river begins as a stream. A conversation begins with a single word. A journey begins with a single step. Again, and again, and again. Maybe we underestimate the power of small beginnings because they look so ordinary. A single page, a single lesson, a single walk, a single conversation, a single day of practice. Nothing dramatic, nothing impressive. And yet, most meaningful journeys are built this way, one ordinary step at a time. Imagine standing beside the ocean at sunrise. The sky does not change all at once. Darkness fades gradually. The colors arrive slowly, minute by minute, almost invisibly. And then suddenly the world looks different. Perhaps transformation often works this way. Slowly, quietly, patiently. Perhaps starting again is difficult because we focus too much on the size of the journey. We look at the mountain, we look at the distance, we look at the years ahead, and we forget something important. The next step is always smaller than the whole journey. The next page is smaller than the whole book. The next lesson is smaller than fluency. The next conversation is smaller than mastery. Perhaps life is not asking us to finish everything today. Perhaps life is simply asking us to begin again. And if that is true, then another question appears, a very important question. What if starting again is not evidence of failure? What if starting again is actually one of the strongest things a person can do? And perhaps that is where our story begins to go even deeper. Perhaps the strongest people are not the ones who never stop. Perhaps they are the ones who return, again, and again, and again. Maybe you've experienced this before. Most people have. You look at someone successful, someone confident, someone disciplined, and from a distance, their journey appears smooth, almost effortless, as if they simply kept moving forward without interruption. But life is rarely that simple. Most journeys contain pauses. Most journeys contain setbacks. Most journeys contain seasons of doubt. What often separates people is not whether they stopped. It is whether they returned. Imagine a lighthouse standing beside the ocean. Storms arrive, powerful storms. Winds crash against the shore. Rain falls endlessly. The lighthouse cannot stop the storm. It cannot control the waves. It cannot change the weather. But when the storm passes, the lighthouse remains, still standing, still shining. Perhaps resilience looks more like that than we realize. Not avoiding difficult seasons, remaining through them, returning after them, Life often asks for that kind of strength, a quiet strength, a patient strength, a strength that does not always look impressive from the outside. Imagine a runner training for a marathon. There are good days, days filled with energy, days filled with confidence, days when everything feels easy. But there are other days too, days of fatigue, days of frustration, days when the runner wants to quit. The marathon is not completed because every day is perfect. The marathon is completed because the runner keeps returning. One run, then another, again, and again, and again. Perhaps many meaningful things in life grow this way. A friendship grows this way. Trust grows this way. Confidence grows this way. Fluency grows this way. Not through perfection, through return. Maybe you've felt this while learning English. Most people have. There are days when every sentence feels natural. Every conversation feels easier. Every lesson feels rewarding. Then there are days when progress feels invisible. Words disappear. Mistakes return. Confidence becomes quiet. And in those moments, many learners ask themselves a difficult question. Am I really improving? It is a very human question. There is nothing unusual about it. But perhaps there is a better question. Not, am I improving every day? But, am I willing to return today? Because improvement often follows return. Imagine a campfire. If the fire becomes small, you do not throw everything away. You add another piece of wood, then another, then another. Slowly, the fire grows stronger again. Perhaps goals work the same way. Perhaps habits work the same way. Perhaps dreams work the same way. They do not always need a dramatic restart. Sometimes they simply need another small step. A single page, a single lesson, a single walk, a single conversation, a single attempt. Small actions often carry more power than dramatic plans. Life seems to understand this. Imagine a river flowing toward the ocean. Along the way, obstacles appear. Rocks, branches, sharp turns, unexpected barriers. The river does not stop forever. The river adapts. It finds another path, then another, then another. Eventually, it continues moving. Perhaps starting again is not returning to the old path. Perhaps it is finding a new one. Many people believe starting again means beginning from zero. But is that really true? Imagine learning to ride a bicycle years ago. Even after a long break, something remains. The balance remains. The experience remains. The memory remains. You are not starting from nothing. You are starting from experience. Perhaps the same is true for life. The lessons remain. The wisdom remains. The growth remains. Even when progress feels distant. Even when confidence feels distant. Even when the journey feels distant. Something remains. Something valuable. Something earned. Maybe you've experienced this before. Most people have. There was a challenge you thought you would never overcome. A season you thought would never end. A setback that felt impossible. And yet, here you are, still moving, still learning, still growing. Perhaps that deserves more credit than we often give ourselves. Sometimes we become so focused on where we want to be that we forget to acknowledge how far we have already come. Imagine looking at a tree. You see the branches. You see the leaves, you see the height. What you do not see are the years, the storms, the winters, the difficult seasons. The tree carries all of them, and perhaps you do too. Perhaps every setback taught something. Perhaps every pause taught something. Perhaps every restart taught something. Life rarely wastes experience, even difficult experience, even painful experience. Even the experiences we wish had never happened. Imagine watching the sunrise. The darkness does not disappear instantly. It fades, slowly, quietly, patiently. The light returns little by little. And yet, no one doubts the sunrise. No one watches the horizon and says, The light is taking too long. They simply trust the process. Perhaps we should offer ourselves the same kindness, the same patience, the same trust, because growth is rarely immediate. Growth is rarely dramatic. Growth is often quiet, almost invisible, until one day you notice something. The thing that once felt impossible feels manageable. The thing that once felt frightening feels familiar. The thing that once felt distant feels close. Not because the journey was easy, because you kept returning, again and again and again. Perhaps that is the hidden power of starting again. Every return is a declaration, a quiet declaration, a personal declaration, a declaration that says, I am not finished. I am still learning. I am still growing. I am still moving forward. And perhaps that is courage. Not never falling, not never stopping, not never struggling, but returning anyway. So if you remember one thing from this story, remember this. A pause is not the end. A setback is not the end. A difficult season is not the end. The journey continues whenever you choose to return. And perhaps the people we admire most are not the people who never stopped. Perhaps they are the people who found the courage to begin again, quietly, patiently, one step at a time. Thank you for spending this time with me, and see you in the next story.